G'day, mate. 40 here. So I was looking at Twitter, and Seth Mandel of Commentary Magazine tweets, "This is how Politico observes Tisha B'Av." So today is Tisha B'Av. It's the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Observant Jews fast for 25 hours, no food, no water. And they read from the Book of Lamentations, and according to the tradition, there are all these horrible events that happened on this day throughout Jewish history. And so Seth Mandel's outraged that Politico has some article that's not completely aligned with the traditional Jewish outlook on Israel. And he's outraged. This is how Politico observes Tisha B'Av. Why the heck would you expect Politico to observe a holiday for, about 0.3% of the American population that observes this holiday? Right? Why would you expect that? Why would you expect everyone to bend to your own minority perspective? Right? That's crazy. So I didn't listen to the Donald Trump, Elon Musk conversation, but what struck me is that the comments on X from at least the people I follow are almost universally positive about Donald Trump's performance. And then the comments from the left of center, and even the center, are quite derisive, like another train wreck for Donald Trump. So apparently he's slurring his words. So I have no idea if this conversation with Elon Musk helped him or hurt him, but just another bit of evidence that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. Same event, completely opposite reactions depending on your politics. So an ongoing theme on this channel is that telling the truth is frequently not a good evolutionary strategy. It's frequently not a good strategy for social advancement and having a happy and easy life. And on that theme, there's a great article in Vanity Fair today about the pressures of Upper East Side Jews. So Upper East Side of Manhattan, right, highly affluent Jews who are spending $50,000 per child sending their kid to a Jewish day school. And apparently, if you send your kid to any type of Jewish day school and then express any empathy or sympathy with the suffering Gazans, you will get shunned. And I remember James DiGiorgio, who I used to host a podcast with about 23 years ago. He's Italian American. He once said to me, "Jews invented shunning." And Jews do highly tune and effectively deploy shunning more effectively than other groups of which I am aware. So there was shunning in my Seventh-day Adventist background, but nothing prepared me for the intensity and the organized lockstep nature of shunning that I would encounter in various parts of Jewish life. So it must be an evolutionary and cultural adaptation living as a minority for 2,000 years. Right? The way that you preserve your distinctive culture is that you continually contrast it positively with the majority culture around you, and you evolve effective means of shunning people who act against the communal interests. And yeah, there are significant portions of Jewish life where if you express any sympathy or empathy for the suffering of Gazans publicly, particularly on social media, but even in Shabbat table conversation, right, you will get shunned. Because people just don't have the time or the energy to go into the nuance of things, usually. Like if you're married with kids, you have to earn $300,000 a year or more to survive in your social circle. You don't have a lot of spare energy. And so traditional Jewish men typically work 6 days a week because a traditional Jewish way of life is highly expensive. Right? You're going to be paying $25,000 to $50,000 a year to send your kids to a Jewish day school. You might have 6, 12 kids. Right? It really mounts up. Kosher food costs more money than non-kosher food. You have to live within walking distance of a synagogue, so that tends to be highly expensive. And so there's just not much energy for bucking the group, particularly if you have kids. Right? You are much more vulnerable than if you are a childless bachelor. You're much more dependent on getting help and cooperation from other people, and so it considerably shrinks your freedom of speech. Hey, let's go to the chat. I wish Mr. Levy an easy and meaningful Tisha B'Av fast. Mr. Ford, please forgive me if I've ever wronged or disrespected you. We're good, mate. We're good, Mr. Judas. Then, on the other hand, there are Upper East Side Jews who have a stronger left-wing identity than Jewish identity, right? So I don't think it makes you a self-hating Jew if you have some other ideology about life that is stronger than Jewish interests, the tribal outlook, stronger than Judaism. So for plenty of Jews, socialism, right, is a more important value system than Judaism or tribal identity. And so for these Jews, Zionism may well be a dirty word. And so this Vanity Fair article noted that if you want to participate in the art world, right, you cannot say that you're a Zionist or you will be immediately shunned. And so when the stakes are significant, right, you don't want to be isolated, right? You look at animals, right? Those who live outside the pack, much more likely to be picked off. So a normal, healthy way of living is living within the center of the pack. And that means on controversial issues, you don't say anything out loud. And so Upper East Side Jews, by and large, have found that the most adaptive strategy is to not say anything about Israel, Zionism, Gaza, the Middle East right now. Because you can enjoy your Jewish identity and your Jewish friends and family. That doesn't mean you don't have competing interests. And so the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has been far more anti-Israel than the center, the Democratic Party, let alone Republicans. So many progressive Jews who are also pro-Israel, they're finding themselves impaled with a conundrum. Can you be impaled with a conundrum? Feel themselves pulled hither and thither. Essentially, they have to decide what's more important to them, their tribal loyalties or their progressive politics. Because if you're in progressive politics, being a Zionist is a dirty word and it will get you exiled. And so some progressive Jews on the Upper East Side who are also Zionists, right, they find themselves retweeting remarks by conservatives just because they see something that's pro-Israel, and so they retweet it, and they have to pay a big price because they've retweeted a conservative. So just imagine you got a wife, a kids, right? You have to make $300,000 a year or more just to keep things stable. I mean, how much energy and strength are you going to have to engage in nuanced discussions about the Middle East when the slightest wrong step will just blow up half of your social circle? So let's have a look at the chat. Yeah, good civic duty yielding to the car. Thank you. So, yeah, it's usually much more conducive to your well-being to keep quiet about many things and to go along with all sorts of things that you don't agree with. Right? If you've had any kind of job, you're expected to perform and to display loyalty towards the company and to its values that may be absolutely abhorrent to you. For example, if you want a job in college faculty, you usually have to write a diversity, equity, inclusion statement, and you may not believe in any of it, but it does have a good evolutionary purpose in that it weeds out weirdos who are not willing to go along to get along, right? People who insist on standing by what they believe, no matter how unpopular it is, right, are going to usually stand out like a sore thumb. It's not usually going to be an easy life if you're going to stand up for what you believe. And I think for most people, most of the time, there are more important values than standing up for what you believe. Because let's face it, we're fallible human beings. We don't know much. And yeah, we all have hero systems. But we can never understand the depth and breadth of the things that we're tempted to stand up for. I know I'm speaking to a bunch of nonconformists as a nonconformist myself, but it's kind of humbled by these highly affluent, highly successful, high-functioning Upper East Side Jews with spouses and kids and valued positions in community who feel themselves absolutely stifled. So there are many things about their lives that I admire, but I can glory in my ability with my austere aesthetic life that at least I get to stand up for what I believe in and say what I believe to be true, which is fun. It's really fun. So I think as I get older, I have less and less patience for just mediocre conversation. And I'd rather read a book or even create a live stream where I talk about what matters to me rather than just nod along with some mediocre conversation of the conventional wisdom. So any feedback on the Donald Trump, Elon Musk conversation last night? Am I wrong in seeing that on the right it's almost universally praised, and in the middle on the left it's almost universally condemned? Oh, Rashida Tlaib, member of the progressive squad in the House of Congress, she has condemned Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, for his invocation of the Geneva Conventions. It's the anniversary of something to do with the Geneva Conventions. And she's saying, is this a joke? How can you remember the Geneva Conventions when you support Israel? And Israel's engaged in all sorts of horrible behavior in Gaza that breaks the Geneva Conventions. But the Geneva Conventions have historically only applied to combatants that wore uniforms and that their state had signed on to the Geneva Conventions. For example, in World War II, Germany and the Soviet Union went to war, and the Soviet Union never signed on to the Geneva Conventions. Therefore, Germany did not feel obliged to abide by the Geneva Conventions, as the Soviet Union did not feel obliged to abide by the Geneva Conventions with regard to the treatment of civilians and prisoners. So Hamas has not signed on to the Geneva Conventions, but this brain-dead Rashida Tlaib thinks that even though Hamas and Gaza have taken on none of the responsibilities of the Geneva Conventions for themselves, they do not limit any of their own terrorism, that somehow Israel should be maximally limited in how they fight back against terror, Palestinian terror that has no limit. And traditionally, civilians have suffered the fate of their country. And it was thought it was nice to try to minimize civilian suffering, but prior to the 1970s, there was never any notion that an army at war would delay or forego achieving its military imperatives for the sake of the suffering of enemy civilians. So you often feel like you're living in a rigged system. I was struck by Chateau Hati's comment that feminism is about maximizing female sexual opportunities while minimizing male sexual opportunities. And so too with human rights and international humanitarian law and the rules of law. Right, the Palestinians and the anti-imperialists, right, they've done a very effective job at creating a narrative and a body of law and changing international institutions like the United Nations and International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice to align with their narrative that gives carte blanche to those quote-unquote fighting imperialism, right, terrorists, and maximally limiting the options to protect oneself from terrorism, otherwise known as counterterrorism. So too, in the workplace, all right, as we multiply laws regarding appropriate conduct in the workplace, all right, that works best to some people's advantage, right? Those who are willing to complain. And generally speaking, it works in favor of women. Right? Women are more in touch with their emotions, therefore they're more in touch with negative emotions, therefore they're more likely to make complaints. And the way that discrimination law works out, women can dress in as provocative fashion as possible. And that's not sexual harassment. But if a man comments on a woman's provocative dress, that is sexual harassment. So that's why many men in the workplace, particularly post Clarence Thomas hearings, feel like they're dealing with a system that's rigged against them. On the other hand, I don't think it's healthy to go around with a sense of resentment. It's higher than, say, a 3 out of 10. It's usually a good idea to keep sex out of the workplace and explicit sexual talk. It's not good for productivity, for driving a business usually. So makes sense that there'd be strong incentives in place to try to keep a handle on men who have much stronger sex drives than women, who are much more prone to getting distracted by matters of sex. So I like this YouTube channel, Modern Wisdom, hosted by Chris Williamson, a former model. And he has a lot of experts who he interviews. And he just had on a woman who talked about the evolutionary reasons for why we fall in love. So she works with that Oxford University Professor Robin Dunbar, who has devoted much of his academic life to studying friendship. And so she says that we have all these evolutionary reasons for falling in love and feeling bonded to people so that we stick around and propagate the species. That without oxytocin and other hormones that are released around love and romance and nurturing, right, we would tend to retreat from the world because interacting with other people is often annoying and messy and dangerous. And I recognize this because I have a default trajectory towards isolation. I just get tired of interacting with people and navigating people's feelings and dealing with everyone else's Narishkeit foolishness. And I'm very tempted to just retreat into reading books, writing essays, and doing live streams where I can have interactions on my own terms. So many people notice I'm not terribly flexible. Right? I want interactions on my terms. And I know this is not healthy, so I have to constantly push myself to do more social things than would come naturally to me. But it's the release of hormones, I can't name them all, that drives us to bond, to reproduce, and then to stick around, to care for and raise our children. So I love some evolutionary psychology. Right? There are certain perspectives on life that just yield, I think, a tremendous amount of wisdom and understanding the incentives driving evolution and survival of the fittest, and what makes for reproductive advantages. Right? It helps to demystify much of life. I think this woman who works with Robin Dunbar is absolutely right. Right? People are often annoying, they get on your nerves. Right? The more people, the more annoyance. And it's these hormones from testosterone to oxytocin that drive us to overcome our own natural distaste. So, of course, love and reproduction, mating is profoundly influenced by culture as well. And we use culture such as the culture of monogamy to keep a handle on all sorts of hormonal drives that are destructive for society. But understanding what's true, understanding incentives, understanding biology and evolution, I think is great for demystifying virtue and understanding the need for virtue. It's great to be virtuous and polite, but sometimes it's wonderful just to hear someone tell truths, and that's why comics are so good, right? They often say impolite truths, and the more prestigious you go in life, right, the higher status you are, the more attention you usually have to pay to social cues and to watch your language. But then even high status people will take great joy in someone like the Hawk Tour girl, right? The Hawk Tour girl, 21-year-old who'd never been on a plane, right, prior to becoming famous. But because she was a little tipsy and she said some truths about, her favorite move in bed that drives a man crazy, that you got to spit on that thing, right? She broke through the civility, politeness, to just sharing some adorable truths. And I was listening to this podcast, I think it's called We Think It's Funny, and the co-host Mark Schiff talked about he had a relative who got fired from the post office for way too much flatulence. And so he sued the post office for his firing. And then they brought in a bunch of his former co-workers who testified how bad his flatulence was. And the guy lost his lawsuit. So I was listening to the episode with Margaret Cho, and she talks about how she's received, a ton of sexual assault over the course of her life. And so far in the episode, I haven't heard her delve into why she happens to receive so much of this. Because I think that we have a profound influence on other people, and we have a profound ability to choose situations that are better or worse suited for us. And some people will just keep putting themselves in situations to get raped. So I heard one way of understanding human behavior is that when we do something wrong, we find ways of justifying it due to external pressures upon us. But when other people do things wrong, we blame them and say that, they were operating out of their own internal pressures. So I was watching a Four Corners documentary on the masculine culture of the Channel 7 network in Australia. And there's all these sad stories from women felt underpaid, underappreciated, and sexually harassed at Channel 7. And I'm just thinking, no one's forcing you to do this job, right? Why are you staying if it's so bad? But it's a classic dilemma. They really want to work in TV. They really want to be a TV journo. Right? They really want a job in journalism. But the economic basis of journalism has fallen apart. And so people badly want something. And so to attain and maintain what they want, right, they're willing to put up with a whole bunch of bad behavior. And there were these stories of various women said they tried to quit Channel 7 and Channel 7 wouldn't let them. Right? They weren't slaves to Channel 7. So my immediate reaction is, how could you be so weak? Right? How could you stay in a situation where you're continually abused? If you want to work in Hollywood, or if you want to work in any exciting high status profession, right, there's usually going to be a significant price to pay as opposed to a boring job where you'll get more benefits, more pay, and less likely to deal with toxic personalities. But on the other hand, it'll just be a more boring job. So if you want the exciting job, right, you'll have to pay the price for all the downsides that come with that exciting job. Ford needs to respect the slower streamer. Oh man, I don't think I've been funny on a live stream for ages. Like what the? I was just thinking that yesterday. I didn't do a live stream yesterday afternoon because I was tired. But also I was thinking I need to stop doing the habitual thing, because it's been a long time since I've cracked myself up. Like when did I last, bring some humor to the show? Like what happened to the funny? I think I'm dispirited by Donald Trump's poor performance over the last month. Right, we've seen the rise of Kamala Harris, and then Donald Trump is just meandering. He's all over the place. He's steadily falling behind in the polls. And just as the fall of Joe Biden filled me with energy to do a lot of writing and live streaming, now the collapse of Donald Trump over the past month has reduced my energy levels. I'm no longer seeing the humor in things nearly as often. I've just completely gotten out of touch with having a few laughs when I do these live streams. So I'm trying to recapture the humor. So that's why I'm listening to this podcast series, We Think It's Funny. They had on Elon Gold, who's an Orthodox Jew and a stand-up comic. And he talked about that he and his wife were high school sweethearts. They'd never been with anyone else. And apparently the co-host of the podcast, Mark Schiff, he's been married for about over 30 years. Jerry Seinfeld, his good friend, has been married for about 25 years. And Mark Schiff just reeled off all these comics who've been married, way over 2 decades. And that's not the general conception of the stand-up comic, right? Normally you think that they have these libidinous, self-destructive lifestyles where they can't maintain relationships and they're all over the map. But Mark Schiff just reeled off a long list of highly successful comics who have maintained marriages for 2-3 plus decades. And they talk about if you strayed, what's that going to bring you? 7 minutes of pleasure. Then you'd lose your spouse, you'd lose your marriage, you'd lose your house, you'd lose the respect and admiration of your children. And so they talked about how Jerry Seinfeld and these others, they just avoid talking to women. Right? They just keep all interactions with women to an absolute minimum to make it easier to stay faithful to their spouse. So they use the Mike Pence method, the method of Orthodox Judaism, which splits up male and female spheres of life in a profound way to reduce the chances of adultery. So I know this Orthodox woman who had lunch with her brother, and there's all this gossip about who's that man that she's having lunch with who's not her husband, right? Is her brother. So that's the price for tight-knit community, where a married woman has lunch with her brother, and because people don't know it's her brother, there's all this gossip about who is she having lunch with someone not her husband. Does Adderall reduce humor? I don't know. But Elon Gold says that he finds an edible. So I think he talked about 5 milligrams of TCP, TCT, or whatever that marijuana thing is that gets you high. He finds a little edible before he goes on stage or when he's writing. It really helps him.
Do you know Burbank very well?
And I went and Googled yesterday afternoon, like how do I get myself in a mood to be funny? And there was like a wiki how with pictures and instructions of how to put yourself into the mood to be funny. I've lost that funny feeling. So one of the ways that you can be funny is when you say impolite truths, right? When you just notice the civil conventions that we have about things, and you just notice how false they are. Such as I often notice after someone's invited me to their home for a meal, and then at the end they say, "Oh, you must come back, anytime." Come back anytime. There's a great convention in Orthodox Judaism where after the meal there's Birkat Hamazon. It's the grace after meal. It's a prayer. It's usually sung. It takes 3 to 5 minutes, and it usually marks the time when afterwards the guests leave. Right? It's a good prompter for people to recognize that it's time to leave. But heck, maybe Adderall reduces humor. Damn. So it's good to see Donald Trump posting again on X. Right, it seems a waste of his comic abilities to restrict himself to Truth Social, which nobody I know is on Truth Social. So if Donald Trump wants to win the election, he should get back on X. But he should have someone checking his tweets before they go out. That was just absolutely insane and embarrassing. 2 days ago, where Donald Trump said that Kamala Harris's crowd size was just generated by AI. There was a good headline in New York Magazine that when Donald Trump loses, he goes crazy. When he goes crazy, he starts losing more. So Donald Trump is in a self-destructive spiral right now. Right, he thought he had the election in the bag. Now the polls are steadily pointing out that he's losing. So he's losing his mind as he's losing in the polls, and then he loses his mind, says crazy things. such as AI is generating these pictures of Kamala Harris's crowds, right, then he loses more and more in the polls. Oh, I read a great article in the Washington Post yesterday by Matt Bai, B-A-I, and he was speculating, why is Donald Trump the only bloke to be president of the United States and to emerge unscathed? So with Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, they aged dramatically in office. But Donald Trump didn't look one bit different than when he entered office. And Matt Bai made, I think, a fair point that Donald Trump is not weighed down by caring for other people. All right. He's not weighed down by other people's suffering. And so my father would say to me, oh, I didn't want to confide in you about XYZ because I didn't want to burden you. But I might be a bit like Donald Trump in that respect. When people confide in me, I don't experience it as a burden, and it doesn't weigh me down. But every other American president has dramatically aged in office. Donald Trump did not. Why? And I think Matt Bai is right, that Donald Trump is not weighed down by the suffering of other people. He does not feel burdened by how, if he makes this or that decision, that millions of people might be hurt. And so, to an extent, his high self-regard, narcissistic personality, right, might be adaptive. And it just seems true to me. He does not seem burdened by the choices that go with being president of the United States, like every other president I've seen. Right, he has a unique ability to be blithe and unbothered by the sufferings of others. He's kind of like the opposite of Elliot Blatt. Like, Elliot Blatt is Mr. Empathy. And Donald Trump just doesn't seem to be terribly burdened by empathy.